Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni moliwanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the lovely town of Santa Rosa in the beautiful state of New Mexico. We are so honored and so happy that you're joining us on our epic cross-country adventure. And we're so very, very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends, your kids, teachers, and principals about the show. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Shawn Peters. He is here to celebrate his debut middle grade novel, The Unforgettable Logan Foster. Before we invite Shawn into the studio, we want to invite all the authors that are listening to us to please be sure to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of our recently revamped website to discover the many ways that we can help you celebrate your book. You can be a guest here on the podcast and in a long-form conversation, tell the world about your fantastic book. You can submit your book to our Reading with Your Kids Certified Great Read panel, and if they believe that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a certified great read. You can also take part in our monthly promotion program. And we will celebrate your book with commercials here on the podcast, with messages to our 100,000 plus social media followers, display your book on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards, and display your book at whatever live event we happen to be at in a particular month. Learn all about that and more by going to readingwithyourkids.com and clicking on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Joining us right now from beautiful Holliston in the wonderful state of Massachusetts. If I was back in my 20s, I might be able to throw a rock down to Holliston. Please welcome to the show the author of The Unforgettable Logan Foster, great debut middle grade novel from our guest, Shawn Peters. Hey, Shawn, how are you?
How are you, Jed? Nice to meet you and be on your show.
I'm delighted to have you on the show. Shawn almost joined us at the Buttonwood Park Zoo to celebrate episode 1500 of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. It just, the scheduling just didn't quite work out, but I think this is even better because we get to sit down in a long-form conversation. We're not melting. That was a really hot day, and so we're not melting. We're kind of cool. We're kind of chill because I want to know all about Logan Foster. This sounds like a great novel.
Thanks. Yeah. Well, first of all, I would have loved to met you in the park that day, and I gotta congratulate you. 1,500 shows is unreal. But I'm happy to be, even if I'm 1,509, I'm pretty glad to be on your roster. So, The Unforgettable Logan Foster is a story about Logan Foster, who's a 12-year-old neurodivergent orphan. He's got a photographic memory. He has a tendency to love facts and sometimes it doesn't fit into the world around him a little bit. And because of that, he's been fostered 6 times and returned 6 times. And he's pretty much given up on the possibility that he'll ever be fostered again, let alone adopted. And he's searching the world for a younger sibling that he's convinced he has, because when he was found at age 3 at an airport, he was wearing a shirt that said "World's Best Big Brother." That's the only evidence he's got. But he now remembers every single thing he's ever seen or heard or read ever since that day. He just can't remember before it. And he has a nice couple that suddenly are interested in bringing him home as a foster child, Gil and Margie. And they seem almost boring. They're so nice, but they're hiding something. And, he's got it in his mind. It could be almost anything. But he could have never predicted the real truth, which is they're superheroes, and that all superheroes are real. All superhero movies, comic books, TV shows, books, they're all there just to cover up the fact that superheroes are real, but they need some downtime, so they need their secret identities. And he gets pulled into that world, and suddenly, after not fitting in for a long time, he's the most typical person in his family because he's the only one without true superpowers.
Well, I I love this for so many reasons. First off, it gives me the chance to say that I think all foster parents are superheroes. All adopted parents are superheroes. Foster parents are superheroes. Foster uncles and aunts and people who support adopted kids and foster kids, they're all superheroes. But beyond this sounds like a really fun adventure.
I think it really is. When you make something a superhero story, you have to have some good action in it. So are there beams of light and earthquakes that make lava come out of of an outdoor mall, and garages fall down, and is there a big bad that can suck your life force just with a touch? Yes. But it's also really a story about found family, like you were talking about with the Fosters. It's about the fact that every kid deserves to be the hero of their own story, and you could be the least powerful person in your family, but you still get to be the hero of your story. Mm-hmm. And, it's also about the idea that your real family are the people that love you and accept you for who you are, as you are, as opposed to asking you to change to fit them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a real powerful story for kids, and it's one that I really wanted to write.
Yeah. Well, there's so much, we often talk about, asking authors, what kind of conversations can families have as they're reading this book? I mean, the answers are coming to me. I mean, just to sit down, I'm imagining after that first few paragraphs when we meet Logan and we discover that he's a kid who's given up thinking that he'll ever be fostered or find a forever home. I've met kids like that. I've met kids who were in that position and found a family home. Like the day after the kid went into his family home, they were in my audience at one of my educational magic shows and got up and told the audience about that. And it was just such a wonderful, magical moment. So to have that conversation with our kids about the fact that there are so many kids out there looking for a home, I think is so important.
Yeah. And, they talk about, I love thinking of middle grade books as, windows and mirrors, right? And I think this book is here for a lot of kids that are looking for that mirror. I think there are a lot of kids that feel othered, that would love to have a hero. He's a small kid. He's, obviously he's on the autism spectrum, so he has been told that he needs to fit in. And I think it's really important for those kids to be able to see themselves in a hero like Logan. But I also hope it's a window. And it can be a window for a lot of different kids. It can be a source of gratitude for a lot of different kids, right? If you didn't grow up in the foster system, like to think just for a second how it would feel to have convinced yourself that you wouldn't have a family and that's okay. That you're, that's a coping mechanism. He doesn't really feel that way, but he's convinced himself. Well, that's really powerful to be able to have that conversation, to have the conversation about his neurodivergence and to say, like, do you have kids in your class that also are on the autism spectrum or ADD or ADHD or Tourette's or anything else that just means that their perfectly good mind processes a little differently. And I'll say that when I do my school visits, one of the things I'm proudest of is I often have kids stand up and participate and either declare that they are neurodivergent, or later their teachers tell me, oh yeah, they're on the spectrum, and the way they participated was different than other presentations. And I've had that happen a couple times also for foster kids, and makes me feel amazing, and I just hope this book's there for them.
Yeah. So it's so important for us to help our kids develop. And I think as we're helping our kids develop, we develop it better. A sense of empathy, a sense that, man, sometimes we may not be happy with the way life is going. We may feel, life is really hard. But, man, there are so many people out there that are struggling with much bigger challenges than we ever face. And we need to be there for them. It might not be our best friend, but we can be, we can stand up if we see them being hurt. We can invite them in if we see them being left out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Logan gets a best friend in this book. And of course, I don't want to spoil everything, but she's the girl next door's. And if it sounds like I said that wrong, I didn't. She's a couple years older than him, very tall, athletic, black and Hispanic. And she lives on both sides of Logan because her parents got divorced but didn't want to screw up her life. So she had lived on one side and the other parent bought the house on the other side. And he meets her for the first time as she's walking back and forth, always in a different outfit after she goes in because she keeps her clothes in both places. And she is one of those people that sees that he's different, and instead of saying, well, that's a reason not to learn more, she's tickled. She's really, to have a neighbor and to see somebody, she opens her arms wide to him. And that's the third person between his foster parents and her who really take him for who he is. And then as you read the book, you learn that she has her own reasons for opening her arms wide to people that might be a little different, and that might be more than okay with her.
Again, just talking about how many kids are in school, how many kids are living in two homes.
Yeah.
How many kids do your kids know who are experiencing that? And what kind of difficulties and challenges may they face on a day-to-day basis?
And I wouldn't say the book is about any of those challenges, but it's there. Those challenges are there, right? It's a superhero story to keep a kid entertained, but along the way, we open those doors, we open those windows, right? To talk about anything from foster families to divorce to, neurodivergence, to, feeling othered because of a physical characteristic like being too small or not having great coordination and things. And for me, that's what a good book can do, is it can tell you a story that has all those hooks for you to grab onto on the way. And it's up to the reader whether they want to,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's, as I look back on my time reading with my kids, and my kids are adults now, and my daughter and I really spent a lot of time. She used to come out and tour with me, and we'd be in the van for 3 weeks at a time, traveling around to different schools. And the conversations that we would have about books or about TV shows, sometimes my beautiful wife would come in and hear the conversation, and she'd be going, you guys were talking about American Idol a minute ago. I'm like, yeah, we still are. No, you're not. You're talking about quantum physics. How did that end?
Right.
Well, it led there. And I think that's beautiful. And I that's why I created the show, is just to remind parents that those conversations that you're having with your 3, 4, and 5-year-old about, the bunny making blueberry pie, they can continue on throughout your lifetime with those kids.
Yeah. I had done almost every kind of writing except writing books for kids. Before I ever started this, I tried to write screenplays and had some that, got real close to something happening, but never quite. I wrote for the Boston Globe Sunday Magazine. I wrote for ESPN. I'm an ad writer. I do advertising and marketing. So I've written for Google and HBO and Staples. And the reason I ended up writing this book was, my kids are 5 years apart, and now they're both grown up. My youngest is 17 and my daughter's 22. But I had that 10-year period between, my daughter Hazel turning 6 or 7 and really wanting me to read her chapter books every night, till my son Teddy got to be 10, 11 and got old enough that he's like, Dad, you can stop reading. I want to read them myself. Where I was reading every night. And I revisited, the books that I grew up with, whether it's Roald Dahl or, Charlotte's Web and, The Phantom Toll Booth and all of those, Madeline L'Engle. But I started reading some of the newer things, obviously the Harry Potters, the Percy Jacksons and stuff. And I just remembered how much I love stories for this age because of all those hooks, because of the conversations we'd have afterwards, because the next morning over cereal, my kids were still thinking about it. And they would say, hey, I was thinking, you know who might be the bad guy? You know, like they got their brains going. And I said, I think I could tell a story like this. And I think I really want to. Mm-hmm. And I was very fortunate that the very first draft of this book I ever wrote, the first reader was my daughter, who had just turned 14 at the time. So she read it herself. And then by the time the book was really ready to go out and be read by agents and everything, my son was about 10, and I read it to him. And so I got, even if it had never published it, I had achieved the thing I had hoped, which is both of my kids got to read my book.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. And what you didn't tell us their review.
Oh, well, so my daughter, first of all, it was a first draft, so it probably was not great. But she liked the story. She really liked Logan. She liked his voice. He talks in a very particular way, and it kind of reminded her of one of her friends from that era, who I definitely based some of the verbal characteristics of. And then my son adored it, but he also adored it because I did all the voices, mm-hmm. and that's a big thing. But I will tell you, probably the most important reviews I got was my wife at the time that this book was being developed was a 5th grade teacher, and she said, while I was waiting to hear back from agents and I was feeling stalled, she said, "Can I read it to my classroom?" And I said, "Of course." So she read it to 60, 70 5th graders, and then I went in and did an author visit. This is before I had an agent, before it had been published, and they thought they were getting an author visit, and I was doing market research, and I got to find out from them what they liked, and the book changed a bit in a very important way because of their feedback. They didn't suggest the change, but they told me something that I thought was cool that they didn't think was cool, and by changing that up, totally changed the book.
Awesome. That's amazing. Do they know that they had that effect on the book?
Yes. Well, there's been an article written in the paper, but my wife, who's now an 8th grade teacher, so some of those kids now are getting her as a teacher again.
That's awesome.
They know some of my earliest fanboys and girls got to read a draft of book 2 in the series before anyone else because I wanted their opinion. I don't think I will ever feel comfortable putting a middle grade book into the world without having it read by at least a handful of kids between the ages of 9 and 14. Mm-hmm. Ever, because listen, my editors are great, my agent's great, my wife is a wonderful teacher and knows great literature for this age. I have a lot of connections, but the book is for those kids. So until you put it in one of their hands, you don't really know if you have something.
Yeah. What is it about superheroes? And superheroes were, when I was growing up, you were kind of expected to leave them alone when you became an adult. It's mm-hmm. like, all right, you're done with that stuff. Move on, get a job.
Right.
So I have a hard time relating to a lot of superhero stuff now, but kids that age fall in love with superheroes. What do you think it is about that age and about superhumans with these amazing powers that is so attractive to middle grade kids?
I think that middle grade kids, even the most confident among them, somewhere feels powerless. Mm-hmm. They can't get themselves from point A to point B. Their time is regulated. They know they have to go to school. They know there are things that they have to do. And I think at that age, there are some that have an idea of like what they'd like to be when they grow up, but I think that at their core, they would like to have more agency. They would like to feel like they could change things. And the one thing every superhero has in common is they make a difference. They have even somebody like Batman who doesn't have a superpower mm-hmm. makes a huge difference, right? He has an impact. And I think that for kids, and you could look at things like magic, and you can certainly think, in Harry Potter, and you can look at being a demigod with, Percy Jackson. It'll always be attractive to that age and maybe a bit older. And I think that's why superheroes have gotten so big with adults too. Mm-hmm. is the more powerless you feel, the more it's wonderful to engage a fantasy where the impossible becomes possible, and maybe you would have the power to make that impossible possible.
Yeah. You kind of answered my follow-up, which was, do you think the fact that superheroes are becoming so in vogue with adult audiences, you think it's because there are so many more adults that are feeling less powerful and don't have the agency that we all crave?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's also a need for escapism for adults more than there has been in the past. There's more on all of our plates, and if you give somebody the choice between opening a book or turning on a screen and seeing what's happening in the world, or seeing a world where something powerful and wonderful and hopeful can happen, it's hard to argue that they shouldn't choose the latter. So I think that is definitely a piece of it. But I also think that superheroes in the last 30 years have gotten more nuanced. I know that when I was growing up in the late 70s and 80s, most of the superheroes didn't have the richest backstories. They may be motivated by revenge or just this kind of Captain America, Superman-esque, I'm a good person and this is what I'm going to do. But there were very few that, at least in the mainstream, that kind of dealt with moral ambiguities. And probably the X-Men were the best example of those, because it was a metaphor for a group of people that have been othered and isms like racism and anti-Semitism and such. So, but in the last 20 to 30 years, the question has been asked that about if you had all this power, how could you keep your humanity? Because there is no way to, save everyone on the planet. So, I think that the stories have gotten a little more nuanced, and there's more room to understand that being a hero is less about being powerful and more about the choices you make of what to do with the power. So I think that has opened it up to an older audience. Plus, special effects have gotten so cool.
Yeah. It's interesting you say that. There's a new Sylvester Stallone superhero movie out on Amazon, and I didn't know it was a superhero movie, and I turned it on, and as soon as I get the feeling, there's a superhero movie, I'm going to but there's something that kept me engaged, and I really ended up enjoying the movie. And it was escapism, but it was a fun story, and it had a lot of those elements that you're talking about. Here's a superhero who's kind of flawed, and he doesn't know, what kind of choices he wants to make. And so, yeah, I found that very interesting.
I'll throw one tiny other thing in. Compared to, being born a wizard or being born a demigod, so many superheroes become superheroes, right? That some of them are born with their powers, but a lot of them have something that happens at some point in their life and they become a superhero. And I think there's a little extra hope and a little extra escapism for people of all ages that, maybe I'm just a spider bite away from becoming somebody special. And I think that'll always, draw attention.
Yeah. Hey, before we go, and I don't know if you mentioned this earlier, but just to get back to a group of people that I think are superheroes, and that's foster kids and kids looking for that forever home. Because when you think about it, so many of them are in hopeless situations, but they still strive to find that hope. Was there one particular thing that inspired you to write about that character?
I think it was kind of a nexus of, one was very, very much about the genre, which is that if you read comic books, if you watch superhero stories, a really large preponderance of them start out as orphans. Very often becoming orphaned is deeply ingrained with them eventually getting their powers or their mission. And so I wanted to look at it from the other way, that you have all these superheroes that are orphans in some way, shape, or form. Wouldn't they want to open their homes to somebody that they could, that they could offer something that they had not gotten or needed? But then the other piece of it was really, and I mentioned this a little bit before, is I wanted to create a character who had been told that his experience was not valid or not normal, even though there really is no normal. And so, middle grade authors are absolutely terrible to our protagonists. I heaped a lot on him between his neurodivergence and his orphan status. I didn't want to make it too hard. Like I didn't have him go through what I would consider to be a realistic foster experience. I know so many kids in those experiences have absolutely so much trauma that they have to survive. But I did want it to be enough that he had decided hope was an extravagance he couldn't afford. Mm-hmm. And I wanted him to land someplace that wanted him and that made him suddenly feel valuable.
Yeah. Well, I'm, this is a book that I'm putting on my to-read list. And
thank you.
I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about the Unforgettable Logan Foster and find out more about you.
Absolutely. So my website is www. I can't believe we still say it, right? ShawnPetersWrites.com. And I'm on Twitter at Shawn Tweeters. That's a name that clearly I made up when Twitter was new. And you can find me other places. And the book itself, is on Amazon. It's from HarperCollins, so it's you can go to harpercollins.com, Barnes & Noble. But of course, if you have a local independent bookstore, talking to them or your library, it's in over 1,000 libraries around the country. And I'm really excited to say that the paperback's coming out in November. So I think it's going to be a lot more accessible for people to buy it, and easier to fit in the backpack. And then I'm really excited to say that the second book in the series, The Unforgettable Logan Foster and the Shadow of Doubt, comes out January 3rd. And so if you are fortunate enough to end up with a gift card for Christmas, Hanukkah, or any other holidays, and are looking for a place to spend it, I would love it if people picked the book up and enjoyed it, because Logan's adventures only get more complicated as he becomes a part of a family.
Well, I think we should have you back on to talk about book 2.
I would love to.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of The Unforgettable Logan Foster, the debut middle grade novel, from our guest, Shawn Peters. Hey, Shawn, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed. This has been a blast. The best part of my week.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be R.U. Gins. He'll be here to celebrate 1, 2, 3, scream! That's the next episode of the podcast. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we're going to start by thanking my guest, Shawn Peters. Please be sure to check out The Unforgettable Logan Foster. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.